This is the Impunity Observer podcast. Fergus Hodgson here, publisher of the Impunity Observer. I have the great privilege today to speak with Trevor Loudon, one of the most long-standing or authoritative researchers on communist movements throughout the world, basically, or at least the Anglosphere. And he caught he came and spoke in Colorado. He has spoken here twice, and I've been to both events. And I picked up his book, White House Reds, back in 2022. Time flies, but he caught my attention just recently because he spoke critically of Tulsi Gabbard, which required him to push against, let's say, the zeitgeist of the Trump or MAGA movement. And I thought that was very interesting. I just, for full transparency, I've met Tulsi Gabbard and have been relatively favorable towards her. So I know she has a leftist past, and I wanted Trevor Loudon to come on and give a more detailed update because this book was out leading into 2020. Most recently, he's written Stealth, Kamala Harris's Communist Roots, and he has another one, film out, Enemies Within the Church. So Trevor, obviously I'm glad to speak with you. Actually, just a little bit of background. He is a fellow Kiwi. He's from Christchurch in the South Island of New Zealand, but my understanding is you live in Florida these days?
That's correct. Always great to hear another Kiwi accent, though, Fergus.
Just tell us then, I've got to be frank with you. I went to the Western Conservative Summit here in Colorado about a year and a half ago, and Tulsi Gabbard, who at that time I don't even think she had left the Democratic Party. She was just the rock star of the event. Do you want to have any comment on why someone who has been deep within, let's say, socialist or the Democratic Party field has been so popular in the Republican arena?
Well, we all love a great conversion story, don't we? We love somebody who's come from the other team and has finally seen the light and has come to our side.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is that when she was in the army, her main specialty was psyops. She knows how to manipulate people psychologically. She knows how to pull the right tunes, pull the strings. I was at the People's Summit in Chicago, and just after she'd come back from Syria, there was 3,000 communists there. That was Democratic Socialist America, Communist Party USA, and she was the rock star of that event too. She made all the right sounds that had 3,000 hardcore communists cheering for Tulsi. So it's not as though she's a novice at this. She knows how to talk about the Constitution, God-given rights. She knows the buzzwords. But her foreign policy in particular is still the same as it was when she was at the People's Summit.
Yeah, just to clarify, people, we're recording this on January 30, and today there are hearings on Senate confirmation. So this is particularly relevant. Now, so yes, she did come out as leaving the Democratic Party and had a very, let's say, forthright article about it. Basically, a letter to America, you might say, how the Democratic Party has become anti-American, has sowed racial division, has become, I think, anti-gun rights or, various American traditions. Is it your personal view that that was just for show, or there was no genuine conversion at all?
Yes.
Okay. And why then was she seen as some kind of enemy of the Biden administration? What happened with this whole terrorist watch list?
She staked out a position. Her job, in my opinion, is to sell pro-Russian foreign policy and anti-interventionist policy to conservatives. And she's perfectly placed to do that because she has a military background, an exemplary one from what we're told. And so she was at odds with what Biden was saying he was doing at the time. Tulsi Gabbard basically reflected every possible permutation of Russian foreign policy for years. Her defense of Assad, her criticism of Trump's attempts for regime change in Venezuela, her working with Christine Ahn, one of North Korea's favorite Americans. Yeah, of course she was going to be at odds with the Biden administration. But you think about this. If it comes out that what I've been saying is well-founded, and there is a scandal with Tulsi Gabbard a little bit down the track, if she should get confirmed, which I'm hoping she won't, all the Democrats are going to say, hand on heart, we voted against it, we opposed it, we told you Hillary said she was a Russian asset. It's blown up in your face. We told you Trump was working with the Russians or soft on the Russians. We tried to warn you, and that is going to blow up in Trump's face probably before the next midterm elections. This is, of course, they're going to distance themselves from her. She is going to, she was very much part of the Bernie camp too, and she saw Bernie betrayed twice by the DNC. And so there's been enmity there for some time. But because she's left the hard left of the Democratic Party, doesn't mean she is now on our side. It just means there are many other options out there. And one of them, which is a camp she's now in, is the pro-Russian isolationist camp. That's where she is now.
Are you personally not a non-interventionist? Do you just see that as basically giving in, like letting go of US influence around the world?
But I don't believe, and I can understand so many conservatives, libertarians, they see the misuse of the US military continuously, the no-win wars orchestrated by the American left mainly and cowardly Republicans. And so this is why Tulsi's message resonates. But you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater because the American troops have been misused. It doesn't mean you pull out of NATO. It doesn't mean you abandon your friends overseas because America needs, this is a mutual, NATO is not just a one-way street. America needs NATO. America needs Israel. America needs friends in the South Pacific, like Australia and New Zealand. America needs friendships with India and Japan and Taiwan and South Korea. These are all necessary for American supply chains, for American ongoing security. But the Tulsi Gabbard types have used Americans' disgust with the misuse and the no-win of troops and no-win wars to actually push real isolation, real, anti-NATO, anti-Israel, all this kind of thing, which is completely to the benefit of Russia and China and North Korea and Iran, all of which Tulsi has to some degree championed in her recent career.
What do you believe motivates her? So she has taken some positions that did put her at odds with the Democratic Party. So, for example, she was one who early on was against transgender so-called women in women's sports. So it's I guess the concern I have is that many people will interpret her as being just a maverick, her own person, and do you not? And maybe there's some alignment, but not necessarily, let's say, a planned alignment, right, with any kind of foreign enemies of the United States. Do you follow what I'm getting at there? That
Yeah, sure. She is an independent. She is a maverick, etc. Look, yes, she may have done that on the transgender sports. Her father, Mike Gabbard, was very much, though a Democrat, was very active in the anti-homosexual movement around America in the 90s, and that came from his. He was a member of an organization that was basically a split from the Hare Krishna movement, very conservative Hindu, and that's Tulsi's background. But she very quickly conformed to the far left when she became a Democratic Congress member. She was pro-Green New Deal. She was anti-Dakota Access Pipeline, anti-regime change in Venezuela. There was nothing on the left that Tulsi wasn't involved in for several years. And that included being a board member of the Bernie Sanders Foundation, where she worked alongside a whole slew of Marxists for several years, hardcore Marxists. There may be a few maverick positions in that time, but for several years, she was 100% on board with the far left Democrat agenda, a vocal champion of it.
Well, right now she's up for Director of National Intelligence, correct? And so she's facing Senate confirmation, and one of the key issues is the perception is, and again, maybe I'm wrong about this, but the perception has been that she will be more respectful or more restrained when it comes to warrantless surveillance of the American people.
Yeah, well, this is it. She will take any position that gets her where she wants to go. Now, she was a militant opponent of Pfizer a couple of years ago. And I'm not defending Pfizer or taking position myself in this, but she is perfectly willing to make the right noises to get where she wants to go. She is very, very ambitious, and she has moved positions on several issues over recent years when it was expedient to do so. And this is another reason why I don't think she's trustworthy at all. She will compromise anything. But the overriding thing that has guided her for the last few years, since coming under the mentorship of Dennis Kucinich, a hardcore pro-communist, pro-Russia Democrat, has been pushing Russian foreign policy points, um, anything that will basically reduce America's role in the foreign policy world, that will amp up the isolationist trend within the American conservative movement. That's the one thing she's been consistent about for the last several years, and that is my main concern, because she's still working with hardcore anti-American communists up till very recent times, not 10 years ago, a year and a half ago.
Are you not concerned then that there's no suitable candidate who will defend, let's say, privacy of American citizens?
I have no objection, say, Pete Hegseth being Secretary of Defense, because he will take a wrecking ball in there and clean out the wokeness. I have no problem with Leo Hohmann just going crazy on immigration and just being very hardcore and disrupting the current system. I'm no problem with RFK, who has also a very problematic background, involved with some heavy left-wing operations. But as long as he's kept on the on the health issue, I'm fine. But Tulsi, the director of national intelligence, the ones who edits intelligence going to the president, that's got to be someone who is not just a disruptor. That has to be someone whose integrity and security consciousness is beyond reproach. And Tulsi fails on both of those counts miserably. Yes, I'm all about if there was somebody who could get in there and sort that. Mike Waller would be great, for instance. Somebody could get in there and tackle these agencies. I'm all about that, but not Tulsi. She is going to blow up in Trump's face if she is appointed.
People should be aware too, actually, and I don't want to say this is the case with Tulsi, but there literally have been foreign agents that have embedded themselves in the U.S. State Department and in the national security apparatus, and from Cuba. Now, why? This is a very prickly challenge, Trevor, that many of the people in, let's say, the alternative or paleoconservative right, like you said, the more non-interventionist right, they do fall into this trap of weirdly identifying with Vladimir Putin and with people who, in my view, are, let's say, profoundly problematic. And it's just a very strange occurrence and this is where you stand out that you haven't taken the bait, but many people in alternative media have taken that bait. And I see it on all sorts of, let's say, various free speech platforms that there's an incredibly weirdly pro-Russia sentiment, which I find confusing. Do you want to comment on, since you work in this field, on why that has evolved or why that has developed?
What we call wokeness, we see this wokeness all around us, which is, woke sport, woke churches, woke corporations, where it's all about racial diversity and all about white privilege and, transgender acceptance. Wokeness is Maoism. Wokeness is consciousness raising. It's like in the Cultural Revolution, they'd put somebody up in front of a crowd and they owned two pigs and everybody else owned one. So everybody would throw bricks at them and whatever and abuse them. And this was to raise the people's consciousness of issues of class oppression. We would call it brainwashing. They called it consciousness raising. Now we call it wokeness. So what we call wokeness comes from China. It's Maoist. That's why sport is so woke, because professional sport is run by Nike, and Nike is a lackey of the Communist Party of China, effectively. So you got this general disgust out there on the right at the rampant left-wing wokeness that's everywhere, permeates everything, and especially young men just are horrified by this. They're disgusted by it. So here comes Vladimir Putin on the horizon. We're anti-woke. We don't go into this transgender stuff. We're going to defend conservative Christian values. We're going to defend you from George Soros and the Muslim hordes. This has been a deliberate program starting in the mid-90s when the Russians first set up pro-family values organizations and started inviting American conservatives to these conferences. And I know many of them. They courted the American conservative right. They put the guys like Alexei, I've just forgotten his last name, Komov, would come to CPAC and come to the Council for National Policy and tell everybody that Putin's a Christian, he's going to save us from the radical gays, and he's going to save us from this. This has been a deliberate policy since the mid-90s to bring the American right into a much more pro-Russian position. It's a scissors strategy. The Chinese run the left. The Russians, they also keep their tabs with the various communist parties, but they have infiltrated the right. And you see this with Marie Le Pen in France. You see it with the AfD in Germany, the Golden Dawn in Greece. This has been a deliberate program by pretending to be pro-Christian, pro-family values, standing up for the traditional values. This has been a very deliberate program to infiltrate the paleo-conservatives, the libertarians, the American conservative movement. Many to the point that many paleo-conservatives have converted to Russian Orthodoxy. But the problem is the Russian Orthodox Church is completely run by the KGB, 100%. There is no religious liberty in Russia. If you are a Baptist or a Seventh-day Adventist, you can have your little church, but you cannot bring your children into the church till they're 18, and you cannot proselytize outside the church, or you'll be severely penalized. And so, so this is why Putin goes to Russian Orthodox services, still proud of his KGB card, but he goes to Russian Orthodox services, talks about anti-wokeness, which is exactly what Tulsi Gabbard talks about, which is exactly what the MAGA communists like Caleb Maupin and Hazal Din and Jackson Hinkle, who is Tulsi's surfing buddy and a professional colleague, now leader of the American Communist Party, but is put on people like Tucker Carlson as a conservative. They are all anti-woke. Now, where did woke come from? It came from China. So we're all anti-woke. Putin hates George Soros. We hate George Soros, so he must be our friend. Putin talks about, protecting us from the Muslim hordes, even though he drove the Muslim hordes into Europe, and the long-time Russian friend Angela Merkel let 1 million of them into Germany. So it's a big, massive psyop that is coming through QAnon, Cato Institute, the Ron Paul movement, and it is infiltrated. Jack Posobiec, obviously Tucker Carlson, who gave softball interviews to Alexander Dugin, the Russian philosopher, who praised Tulsi when she ran for president, actually publicly praised her, and Putin and Lavrov. So there is a big Russian movement to infiltrate the right. It's been going on for a long time, and Tulsi epitomizes, Tulsi is a favorite of the people who have swallowed this line.
Yeah, but let's just clarify though. I mean, I've seen this myself, to be frank. Andrew Torba, the founder of Gab, seems to be one who's also
Absolutely, yes.
gone for this. Now, but what exactly would let's say the Russian leadership or government, they regime, they want to have influence or sway with the U.S. right wing.
Yeah.
To what end? What exactly is their goal? That the US just pull out of Ukraine or have no influence in Ukraine or
Russia and China have an unlimited intelligence sharing partnership that's been in effect since about 1997. They hold massive joint military exercises together. Their goal has always been to tilt the balance of power so they run the world. So Russia, China, and Iran are the dominant powers in the world. How do you achieve that? You've got to disband NATO. You've got to weaken America's influence in the world. How do you do that? Because the American right has traditionally been very strongly anti-Russia, anti-expansionist. So therefore, if you can get a lot of sway inside the American right and turn it into a much more isolationist right that is no longer willing to support Israel, no longer willing to support Ukraine, no longer willing to support NATO, you tilt the balance of power in favor of Russia, China, and Iran. They call this multipolarity, you know. And I see multipolarity parroted now at conservative conferences. This is a KGB operation. Multipolarity means we had a unipolar world. America was the number one power. Everybody looked to America. That's bad. Let's have a multipolar world where the power is shared around into various spheres of influence and America's role is reduced. And this plays into the paleo view, the non-interventionist view, the endless wars view. And therefore, Russia and China will be the beneficiaries of this. It won't be a multipolar world, it'll be a tripolar world. All the power will gravitate to Russia, China, and Iran. America will be completely isolated, and the end of Western civilization will be at hand. This is the old goal that the Russians and the Chinese have been working on since the Bolsheviks took over in 1917. The KGB still runs Russia. It's more powerful now than it was during the openly communist days. And, Vladimir Putin has organized 2 international communist youth conferences in the last 5 years. 30,000 kids at Sochi, Russia in October 2017, and several thousand in Moscow the beginning of 2023. International communist conventions keynoted by Vladimir Putin and telling the kids, the future is yours, I am with you. This is what we got to understand. The game hasn't changed. What has changed is in Europe and America, now there are big, strong pro-Russia parties infiltrating the conservative movement, which makes it very hard to rally conservative support for Ukraine or NATO or Taiwan or Israel, etc. This is a shift of power orchestrated by the Russians and the Chinese to isolate and compromise the American right, so it's no longer an effective opposition to their goals and objectives.
it is we could speak all day about this, Trevor, and I appreciate your time. I've actually written on this before, the fact that the relative dominance of the United States for the prior to let's say 2010 actually had benefits.
If America's doing well, we're going to do well. If America's safe, look, I had a friend in New Zealand just after Trump won the election. She phoned me and said, I feel safe again now. You know, Kiwis and Aussies understand that if it isn't for strong America, we're in deep trouble with the Chinese.
Absolutely. And this is playing out with this, let's say, confrontation or with the Canadians as well, because they're so compromised. There's a book I've got over here Claws of the Panda, which discusses how the Chinese have infiltrated so deeply in Canada. The book, which has a chapter about Tulsi Gabbard, which is a little bit older now, is White House Reds. But the latest book from Trevor is Stealth, Kamala Harris's Communist Roots. And then the latest film is Enemies Within the Church. He's on X, Trevor Loudon, #1. I'll share all these in the show notes. And as I said, we're recording this on Thursday, January 30. I'll try to get this out as soon as possible. Trevor, I appreciate you speaking forthrightly, just, being an independent researcher and calling it as you see it. Okay.
Well, thank you. I want Trump to succeed, and Tulsi Gabbard would be a landmine waiting to explode, to be exploited by the left, by the Democrats, to pin the Russian narrative right back on Trump. That's the problem.
Thanks for your time, Trevor, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you very much, Fergus. Always a pleasure.